My fiancé broke off our wedding because his powerful family thought my background wasn't good enough for his political career. They thought I would just disappear quietly, nursing a broken heart. They didn't know their former compliance officer, the woman who made them look clean, was about to become the anonymous source that would dismantle their entire empire. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The crystal glass of champagne, still faintly beaded with condensation, sat untouched on the marble countertop between us. It was supposed to be for a toast. A week from today, we were supposed to be married. Instead, Preston stood across from me, his posture as rigid as the steel beams of the skyscraper that framed our panoramic view of the city. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking just over my shoulder, at the life we were supposed to have, as if it were a landscape he was already committing to memory. "Amelia," he began, and the sound of my name in his mouth was suddenly foreign, clinical. "We need to be realistic." I waited, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from trembling. I had spent the day in final fittings, my mind filled with lace and vows. I'd come home to this. To him, standing in a funereal stillness, the vibrant energy that always surrounded him completely extinguished. "My father and I had a long talk this afternoon," he continued, finally forcing his gaze to meet mine. His eyes, usually a warm, confident blue, were clouded with a resignation that terrified me. "My campaign is gaining serious traction. The polls are better than we ever expected." "That's wonderful, Preston," I said, my voice a thready whisper. I already knew this wasn't about the polls. He took a deep breath, the kind a man takes before delivering a verdict. "The family believes that for this to work, for my future to be secure, everything has to be aligned. The narrative has to be perfect." "The narrative," I repeated numbly. It was a word his father, Augustus, loved. Everything was a narrative. Business, politics, life, you don't live it, you script it. "They feel, and I have to agree, it's a strategic liability that your background isn't," he stumbled, the first crack in his polished facade. "It's not that they don't respect you, Amelia. You're brilliant. You've done more for the company than anyone. But the public, the donors, they expect a certain pedigree." Pedigree? The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. He was talking about my parents. My father, a mechanic who ran his own small garage with grease-stained hands and an honest heart. My mother, a public school teacher who spent 40 years shaping young minds. He was talking about my state school scholarship, the loans I worked 3 jobs to pay off, the fact that my family name wasn't etched onto the cornerstone of a museum or a university library. I felt a strange calm wash over me, a chilling clarity that pushed back the initial tidal wave of pain. I had seen this coming in 1,000 small ways. In the polite, dismissive smiles of his mother at charity galas, in his father's habit of calling me a remarkable asset as if I were a stock portfolio, in the way their friends' eyes would glaze over when I spoke of my hometown. I had just chosen to ignore it, believing our love was stronger than their prejudice. I slowly slid the engagement ring from my finger. The diamond, a Vanderbilt heirloom, was obscenely large, a weight I had never gotten used to. It felt cold against my skin. I held it out to him, my hand perfectly steady. "I understand," I said, and the quiet simplicity of my own voice surprised me. There were no tears, no accusations. The shock was too deep, the wound too precise. A messy, screaming fight would have been a comfort, a sign that there was still passion there. This was an amputation. He took the ring, his fingers brushing mine for a final, fleeting moment. He looked relieved, and that was the part that truly broke me. He had expected a storm, and my calm was his absolution. "Amelia, I am so sorry," he murmured, but the words were hollow, rehearsed. "No, you're not," I replied, still in that unnervingly placid tone. "You're practical, you're a Vanderbilt." I turned and walked toward the bedroom, the one we had shared for 2 years, to pack a bag. I didn't look back. I knew what I would see. a man already reframing his narrative, recasting the role of his wife. The betrayal wasn't a clumsy, passionate crime. It was a calculated, strategic execution. The silence of my new apartment was absolute. It was a small, one-bedroom place on the other side of town, rented in a single afternoon with the detached efficiency of a refugee. The walls were a sterile, landlord-special white, and the only furniture was a mattress on the floor and a single cardboard box containing my laptop, a few changes of clothes, and a framed photo of my parents. Everything else, the custom-built furniture, the art we'd chosen together, the life I had thought was mine, remained in the glass tower with Preston. For 3 days, I did nothing but exist within those white walls. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I felt hollowed out, as if some essential part of my emotional architecture had been professionally demolished. My phone buzzed intermittently with texts from concerned friends and my mother, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I explain that the man I was supposed to marry in 4 days had returned me like a faulty product because my packaging wasn't up to brand standards? On the 4th evening, the evening that should have been our rehearsal dinner, something shifted. The numbness receded, replaced by a slow-burning, icy anger. It wasn't the wild, destructive fire of heartbreak. It was a controlled flame, the kind you use for precision welding. I opened the cardboard box and pulled out my laptop. It was a sleek, powerful machine provided by Vanderbilt Corporation, but the data on it was mine. I powered it on, my fingers moving across the keyboard with an old, familiar purpose. After entering a 32-character encryption key, I navigated to a hidden, partitioned drive. On it was a single, password-protected folder labeled simply, Insurance. I clicked it open. Inside were hundreds of subfolders, each meticulously organized by date, project name, and transaction type. It was my life's work for the past 3 years. When Augustus Vanderbilt had first hired me as lead financial compliance officer, he'd given me a single, chillingly ambiguous directive. Make us respectable, Ms. Evans. Clean the slate. The future of this family depends on it. I had been young, ambitious, and deeply in love with his son. I saw it as a challenge, a quest. I dove into their labyrinthine finances, a complex web of shell corporations, consulting fees to thinly veiled political lobbying groups and real estate deals with suspiciously inflated valuations. I worked tirelessly, streamlining their books, creating legitimate paper trails, and restructuring their assets to be fully compliant with federal law. I had, in effect, laundered their reputation. But I was not naive. From the very beginning, I understood the risks of knowing so much. So, for every dubious transaction I rerouted, for every questionable contract I rewrote, I kept a copy of the original. I saved the unredacted emails, the original wire transfer receipts to offshore accounts, the audio recordings of board meetings where Augustus casually discussed managing regulatory officials. I compiled it all in the Insurance folder, a digital fortress of truth I hoped I would never need to open. It was my protection against the day they might decide the woman who knew all their secrets was a liability. I never imagined the liability they'd see was my last name. I scrolled through the files, my work, my masterpiece of deceit, the Cayman Project, the Senator's Land Trust, the Urban Renewal Fund that had displaced hundreds of low-income families to make way for a luxury high-rise, with all the profits funneled through an untraceable holding company. They had praised me for my brilliance, my discretion. Augustus had once toasted me at a dinner, calling me the architect of our new era. They saw me as a tool, a very effective one, and now that the tool had served its purpose, it was to be discarded. A bitter smile touched my lips. They had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the one who built the pristine facade they hid behind, and I had kept the receipts. My journey into the Vanderbilt world felt like a fairy tale at first, the kind they tell you can only happen in America. I was the girl from Northwood, a town known more for its shuttered factories than its success stories. My ticket out was a brain that could see patterns in numbers the way a composer sees a symphony in notes. A full academic scholarship led to a degree in finance, and I graduated at the top of my class, hungry and determined to prove myself. Vanderbilt Corporation wasn't just a company, it was an institution in our state. Their name was on hospitals, university halls, and symphony centers. When their recruiter approached me at a university job fair, I was stunned. They weren't known for hiring outside of a small circle of Ivy League schools and rival dynasties. But they had a problem, a modernization issue, the recruiter had explained. They needed new blood, fresh eyes. The truth, I would learn, was far murkier. Augustus Vanderbilt III wasn't modernizing, he was sanitizing. Decades of cutthroat, old money business practices were catching up to them in a new era of digital footprints and regulatory oversight. He needed someone smart enough to understand the mess, and crucially, someone with no existing ties to his world. An outsider who could be trusted precisely because she had no alliances. I was the perfect candidate. I met Preston on my third day. He walked into my sterile office, a stark contrast to the mahogany-paneled lairs of the other executives. He wasn't there to talk business. He'd heard about the prodigy from Northwood and was curious. He was charming, disarmingly so. He didn't carry the weight of his name with the arrogance of his father. He seemed genuinely interested in my life, asking questions about my family and my town with an attentiveness that felt real. Our romance blossomed away from the watchful eyes of the boardroom. We had stolen lunches in small, unknown cafes, long walks in parks where no one recognized him, and late-night talks where he spoke of his own dreams, a career in public service, a desire to use his family's power for good to be more than just his father's son. I believed him. I fell in love with the man, not the name. Augustus was a different story. The patriarch of the Vanderbilt clan was a man carved from granite and ambition. From our first meeting, he assessed me not as his son's girlfriend, but as a potential acquisition. He was polite, of course. His manners were impeccable, a finely honed tool of disarmament. "Amelia," he'd said, shaking my hand at a family dinner at their sprawling estate. "Preston tells me you have a remarkable mind for numbers, a valuable skill." He'd smiled, but it never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "We do so appreciate your work." Over time, the subtle condescension became more pronounced. He would introduce me to his powerful friends as the brilliant young woman who keeps our house in order. At dinner parties, he would ask me to explain complex financial concepts to his guests as if I were a parlor trick he was showing off. He once held up a wine glass, swirling a dark red liquid that cost more than my father's monthly mortgage payment. "The Vanderbilt name, like this wine, has a legacy, a terroir," he'd said, looking directly at me. "It cannot be replicated, it must be inherited." I tolerated it for Preston's sake. I told myself that the father's sins were not the son's. I poured my energy into my work, driven by a dual purpose, to protect the man I loved and to prove my own worth. I untangled the knots of their past, one by one. I found the hidden ledgers, the gentlemen's agreements that amounted to price fixing, the political donations funneled through nonprofits to bypass campaign finance laws. Each discovery was a small shock, a crack in the pristine image the family presented to the world. But I saw it as cleaning house. I convinced myself that I was helping Preston build a new, honest foundation for his future. I was so focused on building that foundation that I failed to see it was quicksand. I was making them clean, making them respectable, making them electable. I was sharpening the knife that they would eventually use to cut me away. My greatest professional achievement was forging the perfect weapon for my own heartbreak. The grief that had encased me for days finally cracked, and what emerged was not sorrow, but a chilling, diamond-hard resolve. I had spent 3 years cleaning up the Vanderbilt's mess, making them presentable to the world. Now I would undo it all. I would simply present the truth. My small, white-walled apartment transformed from a sanctuary of sadness into a war room. I wasn't a jilted fiancé anymore. I was a compliance officer embarking on her final, most important audit. My target was the entire Vanderbilt empire, and my objective was not revenge, but exposure. Revenge felt hot and messy. What I wanted was cold, clinical justice. I didn't need to hire a private investigator or a forensic accountant. I was the investigator and the accountant. I had all the primary source documents I needed, stored safely in my insurance file. The challenge was not in finding the evidence, but in weaving it into an undeniable, coherent narrative of corruption that no lawyer could dismiss and no PR firm could spin. For the next 72 hours, I barely slept. Fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury, I worked. I created a master document, a timeline of malfeasance stretching back 15 years. I cross-referenced emails with wire transfers, linking Augustus's coded instructions to specific payments made from offshore shell accounts. I annotated real estate contracts, highlighting the clauses that detailed kickbacks to city officials. I transcribed the audio files from board meetings, adding footnotes that explained the context of their euphemistic language. How community outreach meant buying off community leaders, and logistical challenges meant environmental regulations they were illegally bypassing. The final portfolio was a masterpiece of condemnation. It was over 200 pages long, complete with a table of contents, an executive summary, and a fully indexed appendix of evidence. It wasn't the work of a scorned lover, it was the work of a federal prosecutor. Now I needed a delivery system. I couldn't just dump the files online, they could be dismissed as a hack, a forgery. I needed a trusted, respected institution to vet the information and present it to the public. I needed a journalist. My research led me to one name, Sarah Jenkins, the lead investigative reporter for the State Herald, the state's oldest and most respected newspaper. She had a reputation for being relentless, ethical, and utterly fearless. She had taken on powerful corporations and corrupt politicians before and won. She was perfect. The next step was to establish contact without revealing my identity. I went to a public library on the other side of the city, using one of their computers to create a new, anonymous email address, Veritas 11235@protonmail.com. The name was a nod to both the truth and the Fibonacci sequence, a small piece of numerical poetry that only I would understand. My first email to Sarah Jenkins was short and to the point. Subject: an insider's story, the Vanderbilt Corporation. Ms. Jenkins, I am a source with intimate, high-level access to the internal operations of the Vanderbilt Corporation. I possess verifiable, documentary evidence of systemic financial misconduct, including tax fraud, bribery of public officials, and illegal campaign contributions related to Preston Vanderbilt's current political campaign. This is not a rumor or a vendetta. It is a documented history. If you are interested in a story that will redefine the political and business landscape of this state, I am prepared to provide you with the evidence. I will only communicate through this encrypted channel. My identity is non-negotiable and must remain anonymous. Veritas. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. Once I sent this, there was no going back. The life I had with Preston, the love I thought we had, would be nothing but ash. I thought of his face when he told me about my pedigree. I thought of Augustus and his condescending smile. I thought of my parents, whose honest, hard work was deemed unworthy. I clicked send. The email disappeared into the digital ether, a declaration of war sent from a quiet public library. The trap was now set. The reply came 26 hours later. It was brief, professional, and radiated the healthy skepticism of a seasoned journalist. Subject: Ray, an insider's story, the Vanderbilt Corporation. Veritas. I receive many emails like this. Most of them lead nowhere. You claim to have verifiable evidence. Prove it. Send me one thing, one document, one email that I can independently verify without tipping my hand. If it checks out, we can talk further. If it doesn't, do not contact me again. S.J. She was testing me, and I respected her for it. A lesser journalist might have jumped at the sensational claims, but Sarah Jenkins needed proof. I had anticipated this. My response was already prepared. I chose my sample carefully. It couldn't be one of the bombshells, not yet. It had to be smaller, something concrete and easily verifiable through public records, but obscure enough that no one would have connected it to the Vanderbilts. I selected a file related to a small commercial property in a neighboring county. The property had been owned by a shell company named Apex Holdings LLC. Publicly, Apex was untraceable. But my files contained the internal incorporation documents, signed by Augustus Vanderbilt's personal lawyer, linking Apex directly to the Vanderbilt family's private trust. The property had been sold to the county 2 years ago for a new municipal building at a price 3 times its assessed value. The county commissioner who had championed the purchase, a man named Henderson, had received a $50,000 personal loan from another Vanderbilt-controlled entity a week after the deal closed. I attached the incorporation document for Apex and the wire transfer record for the loan to Henderson. Subject, Ray, an insider's story, the Vanderbilt Corporation. Ms. Jenkins. Attached are 2 documents. 1, the incorporation record for Apex Holdings LLC, showing its link to the Vanderbilt Trust. 2, a wire transfer record to County Commissioner Henderson. Cross-reference with the public record of the county's purchase of the property at 451 Oak Street. I trust you can draw the necessary conclusions. Veritas. I sent the email and waited. This was the most vulnerable part of the plan. If Sarah's inquiries were detected, the Vanderbilt's internal security, which I myself had helped design, would immediately sound the alarm. They would lock everything down, and my window of opportunity would slam shut. 3 days passed in agonizing silence. I imagined Augustus getting a call, his cold eyes narrowing in suspicion. I pictured Preston being alerted, the color draining from his face as he realized his liability of an ex-fiancé might be more than just heartbroken. On a Tuesday morning, a new email arrived from Sarah. Subject, we need to talk. Veritas. It all checked out. The property deal, the shell company, Henderson's sudden windfall. It's all there, hiding in plain sight. I've been a journalist for 20 years, and my gut tells me this is just the tip of a very large, very ugly iceberg. You have my full attention. Send me everything you have. I will dedicate my team to this. We will protect you. Who are you? S.J. The thrill that shot through me was not one of joy, but of vindication. The first domino had fallen. The confrontation wasn't happening in a boardroom or across a dinner table, but in the sterile, secret space between our encrypted inboxes. The reveal was unfolding piece by piece as Sarah began to see the same truth I had spent years uncovering. My anonymity was my shield and my sword. I was no longer Amelia Evans, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks. I was Veritas, an omniscient, unseen force of judgment. Subject, Ray, we need to talk. Ms. Jenkins. You are correct. That was merely the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the iceberg is attached. My identity is irrelevant. All you and your readers need to know is that I am the person who knows where all the bodies are buried. Veritas. I attached the master file, all 200 pages, the entire history of their sins, the complete blueprint of their downfall. I pressed send, and with that single click, the Vanderbilt dynasty was placed into the hands of the one person they could not control, bribe, or intimidate, a reporter with a front page to fill. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in journalistic diligence. Sarah Jenkins and her team at the State Herald moved with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. Through our secure channel, she sent me periodic updates and clarifying questions. Each email from her was a new stone overturned, a new dark secret brought into the light. Veritas, the money trail from the Urban Renewal Fund. It leads to 3 state senators on the zoning committee. Is that your understanding? Yes, I would reply, and I would attach the specific email from Augustus, where he referred to the senators as our 3 friends on the committee, and authorized the charitable donations to their pet projects. Veritas, Preston Vanderbilt's campaign platform is built on fiscal responsibility. We've found evidence he personally signed off on writing off a failed multi-million-dollar real estate venture as a loss, transferring the debt to a subsidiary to avoid taxes. Can you confirm? Confirm, I'd write back, my heart twisting slightly at the mention of his name. I attached the signed document, his familiar, confident signature scrawled at the bottom. There was one night, deep into the process, when a wave of doubt washed over me. I was sitting in my silent apartment, staring at a picture of Preston and me from a year ago. We were on a sailboat, his arm around me, both of us laughing, the sun warming our faces. He looked happy. I looked happy. Was I destroying the man I once loved? Was this justice, or was it just a more sophisticated form of revenge? My phone buzzed. It was a news alert. A local TV station was running a fawning profile on the Vanderbilts, the first family of state politics. There he was, Preston, standing on a stage with his father, smiling for the cameras. The chyron read, "Preston Vanderbilt pledges to end corruption." The hypocrisy was so staggering, so brazen, that it snuffed out my moment of doubt like a candle in a hurricane. This wasn't just about my broken heart anymore. It was about them lying to the faces of millions of people. It was about Augustus using his son as a respectable front to further the family's corrupt legacy. My resolve hardened, stronger than before. They had made their choice. Now I was making mine. I dug back into my files and pulled out the last, most damning piece of evidence. It was something I had held back, the ace up my sleeve. It was an audio file of a conversation between Augustus and his brother, recorded during a contentious board meeting I had been asked to minute. In the recording, Augustus was livid about a federal environmental investigation into one of their manufacturing plants. His words, captured in crystal-clear audio, were chilling. "I've already spoken to the judge," Augustus seethed. "He's an old friend. He understands the importance of economic stability. This investigation will disappear. It will cost us, but I will not have my son's campaign tarnished by some tree-hugging bureaucrat." It was an unambiguous admission of bribing a federal judge. It was the one piece of evidence that could send him to prison. I attached the audio file to an email. Subject: the final piece. Ms. Jenkins, I believe this will be of interest. It is a recording of Augustus Vanderbilt from 6 months ago. Listen carefully. Veritas. The response from Sarah came less than an hour later. Subject: Ray, the final pike. Ray. Oh my God. Veritas, this is everything. The editors are meeting now. Legal is reviewing. This is it. It's going to press. The story runs on the front page tomorrow morning. Are you ready? SJ. I looked around my small, empty apartment. It felt less like a prison now and more like a cocoon. Tomorrow, I would emerge. The world would not know my name, but they would know my work. I thought of the wedding dress hanging in the back of my parents' closet, a ghost of a life that would never be. I typed my final reply. I am. The morning broke gray and damp, the sky the color of old newsprint. I was up before dawn, a nervous energy thrumming through me. I walked the 2 blocks to a small, 24-hour convenience store, the city still asleep around me. The fresh stacks of the State Herald were tied up with twine just inside the door. I bought 5 copies. Back in my apartment, I spread one out on my small kitchen table. The headline, in a bold, stark font, took up the entire top half of the front page. Vandrbilt Empire, a legacy of fraud, bribery, and deceit. Exclusive report by an anonymous insider. Beneath it was a stern-looking picture of Augustus and a smiling campaign trail photo of Preston. The story, written by Sarah Jenkins, started on the front page and consumed 4 full pages inside. It was all there. Apex Holdings, the corrupt commissioner, the senators on the zoning committee, the tax evasion. And the centerpiece, a direct transcript from the audio file, Augustus boasting about owning a federal judge. I read every word my creation laid bare for the world to see. It was more devastating, more complete than I had even imagined. Sarah had woven the threads of evidence into a tapestry of corruption so vast and undeniable it was breathtaking. They called my source the insider, a ghost in the machine who, as the article stated, knew where all the bodies were buried. I made a cup of coffee and turned on the local news. The story had already exploded. Every channel was leading with it. Legal experts were dissecting the evidence. Political analysts were declaring Preston Vanderbilt's campaign dead on arrival. Rival politicians were feigning shock and calling for immediate, sweeping investigations. Around 10 a.m., they cut to a live feed. A swarm of reporters was gathered outside the Vanderbilt Corporation headquarters. A fleet of black cars pulled up, and men and women in dark blue jackets with 3 bold, yellow letters on the back began streaming into the building. The raid was happening. Later that afternoon, they televised Preston's emergency press conference. He stood at a podium, his mother and father conspicuously absent. He looked pale, shrunken, a ghost of the confident man who had dismissed me just weeks ago. He stumbled through a prepared statement, denying the baseless allegations and blaming politically motivated enemies. But his eyes were wide with panic. He knew. He had to know that the only person outside his family who could have known all of this was me. I watched him and I felt nothing. No pity, no lingering love, no triumphant glee. It was like watching a stranger on the news, a character in a drama that had nothing to do with me. The emotional connection had been so completely severed that all I felt was a profound, quiet sense of finality. The climax of my story was not a tearful confrontation or a shouting match. It was this: me, sitting alone in a quiet apartment, watching an empire crumble on a television screen. It was the silent, irrevocable transfer of power. They had taken my future, so I had taken their house of cards and blown it away with a single, whispered breath of truth. I finished my coffee, folded the newspaper neatly, and placed it in the recycling bin. I stood up and looked out the window. The gray sky was beginning to break, and a sliver of sunlight pierced through the clouds. A weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying had lifted. The sense of release was absolute. Justice had been served, not by a court of law, but by a front-page story, and I was finally completely free. In the weeks that followed, the Vanderbilt dynasty collapsed with breathtaking speed. The State Herald story, backed by my irrefutable evidence, triggered a cascade of consequences that no amount of money or influence could stop. Augustus Vanderbilt was indicted by a federal grand jury on multiple counts, including bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The audio recording was the nail in his coffin. His brother and several other top executives were also charged. The Vanderbilt Corporation was buried under an avalanche of lawsuits from shareholders, competitors, and the families displaced by their fraudulent urban renewal fund. Their assets were frozen, their reputation shattered beyond repair. Preston's political campaign, of course, vanished overnight. He was never charged with a crime. I had been careful to only include evidence of his moral, not criminal, complicity, but his name was now political poison. He retreated from public life entirely, a pariah in the very circles he had sacrificed our relationship to impress. I watched it all from a great distance. The day after the story broke, I packed my few belongings, terminated the lease on my apartment, and bought a one-way train ticket across the country. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I simply disappeared. My new home was a city where no one knew the Vanderbilt name, a place of bright sunshine and ocean breezes. I found a job as a financial analyst for a small, ethical investment firm that specialized in sustainable energy. My life became wonderfully, blissfully anonymous. My days were filled with numbers that represented progress, not corruption. My evenings were spent walking on the beach, letting the salt spray wash away the last vestiges of my old life. About 3 months after I moved, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A few moments later, a message notification appeared. It was from Preston. I stared at the notification for a long time, my finger hovering over the play button. What could he possibly say? Would he be angry, apologetic? Would he beg for an explanation? I realized, with a sense of profound peace, that it didn't matter. His voice, his words, his reasons, they had no power over me anymore. Hearing his voice would be like inviting a ghost into my new home, and I had worked too hard to exorcise my ghosts. With a calm, steady hand, I deleted the voicemail without listening to it and blocked the number. My apartment overlooked not a sprawling city skyline, but a simple, beautiful park filled with laughing children and ancient, sprawling oak trees. I had traded a life of marble and champagne for one of sunlight and quiet contentment. I had been told my background wasn't good enough, that I didn't have the right pedigree. But in the end, my background, one built on honesty, hard work, and an unwavering belief in the truth, had been the one thing the Vanderbilt dynasty couldn't survive. They had underestimated me, and in doing so, they had authored their own demise. I was no longer an asset, an architect, or an insider. I was just Amelia. And for the first time in a very long time, that was more than enough.